The last governess had lasted 9 days, the one before her, 4. Miss Honoria Gray, arriving at Ravenshallow in the rain, with one small trunk and no expectations, rather thought she might beat them both, if only because she had nowhere else on earth to go, and therefore could not afford to be frightened off. She had been warned, of course. Everyone warned everyone about the Duke of Ravenshallow. The coachman who drove her from the village had warned her, with the grim relish of a man delivering someone to a haunted house. The scarred Duke, they called him, and worse things than that. Burned in a fire 3 years past, the same fire that took his wife. Half his face ruined, they said, and his temper with it. And he'd shut himself up in that great black house and not shown his face in the county since. And he went through governesses for his little girl, the way other men went through candles, because no one could stand the sight of him, and he could stand the sight of no one. And the child was near as wild and strange as her father, and Miss Gray would do well to keep her wages in her pocket, and a coach fare besides, for she'd not last a fortnight. Miss Honoria Gray had listened to all of it, and thanked the coachman, and thought privately that a man who had lost his wife and his face in a single night, and been abandoned by the whole world on account of the second loss, as though it were a moral failing, sounded less like a monster than like the loneliest person in England, and that his little girl, motherless and frightened, and passed from governess to governess like an unwanted parcel, sounded like exactly the kind of child who most needed someone to simply, stubbornly, stay. And staying was the one thing Honoria Gray knew how to do. She had had a great deal of practice at enduring what others fled. She was 26, and she had been a governess since she was 19, when her family's small fortune had evaporated and left her to make her own way. She was not pretty in the fashionable manner. She had a plain, calm, steady face, and steady gray eyes, and a way of not being flustered that had unnerved several employers, who preferred their dependents nervous. And she had learned, in 7 years and 5 households, the one great secret of her trade, which was this, that frightened creatures, and most people she had found were frightened creatures underneath, do not need to be charmed, or fixed, or managed. They need someone to remain in the room, to not flinch, to not leave. Most of the cruelty in the world, Honoria had come to believe, was only fear wearing armor, and most of the armor came off, in the end, in the presence of one person who refused to be driven away. She met the child first. Lady Grace Ravenshallow, 7 years old, was produced by a harried housekeeper in the great cold hall, a thin, watchful, unsmiling little girl who looked at her new governess with the flat wariness of a child who has learned that adults arrive and adults leave, and it is safest to become attached to none of them. She did not curtsy. She did not speak. She stood and stared, waiting, Honoria understood, to see how long this one would last before she, too, packed her trunk and fled. "Hello, Lady Grace," Honoria said, crouching down to the child's level, unhurried. "I am Miss Gray. I am told a great many governesses have come and gone, and I expect you are wondering how soon I shall go too. I will save you the trouble of wondering. I am not going to go. I have nowhere else I wish to be, and I find I already like the look of you, and I am extremely stubborn, which my last 4 employers considered a great fault, and which I consider my best quality. So you may stop watching the door for my trunk. It is staying, and so am I. Now, will you show me the schoolroom, or shall we let the housekeeper do it and go and find something more interesting instead?" The child stared at her. Something flickered behind the flat wariness, surprise, and the faintest, most cautious flicker of something that was not quite hope, but was its distant cousin. "They all say that," Lady Grace said. Her voice was small and grave, "that they'll stay, and then Papa frightens them, or I do, and they go." "I don't frighten easily," said Honoria Gray. "It is a documented fact. Ask anyone. Come, show me the house. I should like to know where everything is, including your Papa, so that I may know which doors to open and which to leave be." And Lady Grace Ravenshallow, after a long considering pause, put her small cold hand into her new governess's, warily, provisionally, as one advances a single coin on a bet one fully expects to lose, and led her into the great dark house where her father hid from the world. Honoria met the Duke on her third night, and she met him because she went looking for him, which no governess before her had been foolish enough to do. She had learned, in 3 days, the shape of the house's fear. The servants spoke of the master in whispers and kept to the far wing. Lady Grace was permitted to see her father for precisely 1/2 hour each evening, in the library, a stiff, miserable ritual that left the child silent and shaking, because the Duke, grieving, scarred, walled up in his ruin, did not know how to speak to his own daughter, and could not bear to be looked at, and so kept the great room in near darkness, and kept the child at a distance, and got the whole thing so painfully wrong that both of them dreaded it, and neither could say so, and it went on being inflicted on them both, every single evening, because no one had the courage to change it. On the third night, Honoria changed it. She did not ask permission. She simply accompanied Lady Grace to the library door at the appointed hour, and when the child went in to her ordeal, Honoria went in too, calmly, uninvited, into the vast dim room where a single branch of candles burned at the far end, and the Duke of Ravenshallow sat in shadow, with the ruined side of his face turned away from the door. "You are not the child," he said. His voice came out of the dark, low and rough, and edged with warning. "Governesses are not admitted here. Get out." "I am Miss Grey, your Grace," Honoria said, not getting out. "Lady Grace's new governess. We have not been introduced, and I thought it discourteous to be 3 days in your house and never present myself, so here I am. I have also come to sit with Lady Grace during her visit, because she is 7 years old, and these half-hours frighten her badly, and a frightened child does better with someone beside her. I hope you will not mind. If you order me out, I shall go, of course, but I should rather stay." There was a silence from the shadowed chair, the silence of a man not at all accustomed to being answered back. "They have told you what I am," the Duke said at last. "The coachman, the servants, they always tell the new ones. You have heard I am disfigured, that the sight of me is not to be borne, and yet you have walked into my library uninvited, and you are standing there speaking to me as though I were an ordinary man, a bitter edge. Have you not looked, Miss Grey? Come closer then. Bring the candle. Look at what frightens the whole county, and then run, and save us all the tedium of your pretending you will stay." It was a test, and a cruel one, and Honoria Grey understood exactly what it was. The challenge of a man so certain of his own monstrousness that he had begun to inflict it preemptively, to drive people off before they could leave him, because being left was the one thing he could no longer survive, and so he had learned to do it first, to himself, on his own terms. She had met the strategy before, in smaller forms. She knew the only answer to it. She picked up the branch of candles, and she walked the length of the dark library, and she came round the great chair, and she looked at the Duke of Ravenshallow full in the face, in the light, without flinching. The scarring was real, and it was severe. The fire had taken the left side of his face, the skin drawn and ridged from brow to jaw, the eye pulled slightly at the corner. It was the kind of ruin that made strangers gasp and look away. Honoria did not gasp, and she did not look away. She looked at it steadily, as she looked at everything, and she let him see her look, and then she looked past it, at the whole man, the dark, unruined eyes watching her with a terrible braced expectation, the grief carved into him deeper than any fire, the loneliness that came off him like cold off a window. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for letting me look, rather than making me pretend not to. It is a great discourtesy, I have always thought, the way people look away from a scar. It tells the person they cannot be met, that a part of them is unspeakable. You are burned, your Grace. Badly, on the left side, from a fire that I understand cost you a great deal more than your face. I have looked at it. It is a serious injury, and it must have caused you great pain. And now I have looked, and I am still here, and I find I am not frightened, and I should still rather stay and sit with your daughter, if you will permit it." She set the candle down where its light fell on them both, on his ruin and her plain, calm face together, and she did not retreat into the shadows to spare him. "You expected me to run. I can see that you did. I expect a great many people have run, and I am sorry for it. because it must have taught you a very lonely lesson that is not true. The sight of you is perfectly bearable, Your Grace. What is not bearable, what I suspect no one has been willing to stay long enough to bear, is your grief. But grief is only love with nowhere to go, and it does not frighten me either. So, may I sit with Grace? The Duke of Ravenshallow stared at the governess standing in the pool of candlelight, who had looked at the ruin of his face, and then, calmly, gone on talking to the man behind it. And something happened in his scarred face that Honoria would think about for a long time afterward. A kind of crack, quickly hidden, the look of a man who has been braced against a blow for 3 years and has just, for the first time, had someone decline to strike it. "Sit," he said roughly, and turned his face away again. But not, Honoria noticed, back into the deepest shadow. "Sit then, if you must. But do not imagine, Miss Grey, that a steady stomach and a pretty speech make you different from the others. They all stayed a night or two. You will go like the rest. Everyone goes." "Perhaps," said Honoria Grey, settling herself beside a wide-eyed Lady Grace, who was staring at her governess as though she had walked through fire herself. "But not tonight. And I find, Your Grace, that a great many impossible things turn out to be only a long series of not tonights, strung together, until one day they add up to never went at all. We shall see. In the meantime, Grace and I were reading a very good story about a dragon, and I think we shall go on with it here, where it is warm, if you have no objection. You may listen or not, as you please. Dragons, in my experience, are almost never as terrible up close as the villagers insist." And she opened the book and began to read aloud, in her calm, steady voice, to the frightened child and the ruined man in the dark library. And the Duke of Ravenshallow, who had ordered her out not 5 minutes before, did not order her out again, and sat in his shadow and listened to a governess read about a dragon, and did not send her away. It was the beginning of everything, though neither of them knew it yet. Honoria only knew that she had gotten through one evening, and that the child had leaned into her side by the end of it, and that the terrible lonely man in the chair had listened to the whole of the story without moving. It was not much, but it was more than 4 other governesses had managed, and Honoria Grey, who knew the value of a single "not tonight," counted it a victory, and went up to her cold little room, and resolved to do it all again the next evening, and the next, for as long as it took. She did it again the next evening, and the next, and by the end of a fortnight, the half-hour ordeal in the dark library had become something else entirely. It changed by inches, the way trust always changes. The first week, Honoria simply read, sitting beside Grace, her calm voice filling the dim room, the Duke a silent shadow, who did not participate, but did not leave. The second week, she began to draw the child out where the father could hear, asking Grace about her day, her small triumphs and troubles, so that the Duke, listening from his chair, learned the shape of his daughter's life for the first time, that she was frightened of the north stairs, that she had named the kitchen cat, that she missed her mother with a quiet ache she had never been permitted to speak aloud. Honoria never forced the Duke to respond. She only made the child reel in his hearing, evening after evening, and left the door open, and waited. And one night in the 3rd week, when Grace mentioned, small and wistful, that her mother used to sing her a particular song, and she could not quite remember the tune, a rough voice came out of the shadows for the first time, unbidden. It was, "The water is wide," the Duke said. "Your mother sang it. She had it a little wrong in the 2nd verse. She always did, and I never corrected her, because I liked her wrong version better than the right one." A silence. "I could. I remember how she sang it, if you wished. I have not sung it since, but I remember." And Lady Grace Ravenshallow slid off the settle and crossed the dark library to her father's chair. The chair no one approached, the shadow everyone feared, and she climbed up into her scarred father's lap, the first time in 3 years, and said, "Sing it the way Mama did, the wrong way, please, Papa." And the Duke of Ravenshallow, with his ruined face and his 3 years of grief, put his arms around his daughter and sang his dead wife's song, wrong in the 2nd verse, in a low, unsteady voice, in the candlelight. And Honoria Gray sat very quietly, with her book closed in her lap, and watched a family that had been shattered by fire begin, in the smallest possible way, to knit itself back together, and had to look hard at the pages to keep from weeping, because this was the whole of what she had come for, and it was happening, and she had done it only by refusing to leave the room. After that, the wall came down in earnest. It came down for the child first, and then, through the child, for the whole silent house. Grace changed almost overnight, or rather, the change that had begun the evening her father sang the song accelerated, the way a thaw accelerates once the first crack runs through the ice. She began to talk. She began, tentatively, to laugh. And one afternoon in the schoolroom, bent over a copybook, she said, without looking up, in the too careful voice children use for the things that matter most, "Miss Gray, may I ask you something, and you will tell me the true answer, and not the kind one?" "Always the true answer," Honoria said, setting down her sewing. "I promise. The kind ones are mostly lies anyway, and you are too clever for them." "Is it my fault?" Grace said. Her small hand had gone still on the page. "The fire, Mama, Papa's face. The nursemaid got me out first, before Mama. I have always thought, if I had not been there to be got out first, they might have had time to get Mama, and Papa would not have had to go in, and his face. I have thought, for 3 years, that it is because of me, that everything that is wrong is because I was the one they saved." She looked up, and her eyes were huge and terrible, with a grief no 7-year-old should carry alone. "You said the true answer. Is it my fault, Miss Gray?" And Honoria Gray put down everything, and came and knelt in front of the child, and took both her small hands, and gave her the true answer, which was also, this once, the kind one. "No," she said, with total steadiness. "No, Grace. It is not your fault, and I am going to tell you exactly why, so that you can believe it and stop carrying it, because you have carried it far too long, and it was never yours to carry. Listen to me. A fire is a fire. It does not choose. The nursemaid got you out first, because you were the child and you were nearest, and that is what a good nursemaid does. She saves the child first, always, every time, in every fire that has ever burned, and she is right to, and your mama would have wanted nothing else in all the world. Do you understand? If your mama could have chosen, and I promise you she did choose, in her heart, long before that night, she would have chosen you out first, 1,000 times out of 1,000. That is what mothers are. Being saved first is not a thing you did. It is a thing you were given, by a nursemaid and a mother who both loved you more than their own safety. And your papa's face. Your papa went into that fire because he loved your mama, and could not bear not to try, and that is his to carry, not yours. And he is learning, slowly, to set it down, and you must learn to set your part down too, because it was never real. You did nothing, Grace, but be a child who was loved enough to be saved. There is no fault in being loved. It is the opposite of fault. It is the best thing there is. Lady Grace Ravenshallow looked at her governess for a long moment, and then she began to cry. Not the silent, frozen crying Honoria had seen that first week, but great gulping, ordinary childish sobs, the healthy weeping of a wound finally allowed to drain. And she flung her arms around Honoria's neck and cried 3 years of secret guilt into her shoulder. And Honoria held her and rocked her and let her, because that too was staying in the room, and it was the whole of what the child had needed and never had. And that evening, when Grace went to the library, she told her father what she had believed and what Miss Gray had said, in the plain, devastating way of children. "Papa, I thought it was my fault, that they saved me first. But Miss Gray says a fire doesn't choose, and Mama would have chosen me out 1,000 times, and it isn't my fault. And it isn't only your fault either. It's just a fire, and we are allowed to stop." And the Duke of Ravenshallow gathered his daughter against his chest, and wept into her hair, and over her small shoulder his eyes found Honoria standing quietly by the door, and the look he gave her was not the look a man gives a governess. It was the look a drowning man gives the shore. And Honoria understood, in that moment, that whatever came of it, whatever it cost her, she was never going to be able to leave this wounded father and this wounded child. Because she had found, in the darkest house in the county, the two people in the world who most needed exactly the one thing she had to give, and a person who finds that has found her whole purpose and cannot walk away from it and remain herself. The servants felt the change before they understood it. The whispers in the far wing softened. The candles in the great house burned brighter. A house that had been a tomb for 3 years began, room by room, to feel like a home again, and at the center of the thaw was a plain, calm governess who had simply refused to be frightened off, and who had, without anyone quite noticing the moment it happened, become the heart the Black House had been missing. The Duke began to talk to her, to Honoria, in the hours after Grace was abed, first about the child, then about the estate, then, slowly, about himself. He had the candles lit a little brighter each week. He stopped turning the ruined side of his face away. And one deep night, when the house was asleep and the fire was low, he told her about the fire that had made him, the whole of it, which he had never told a living soul. "They say I was burned rescuing her," he said, staring into the coals. "My wife. That is the version the county tells, and it is kind, and it is a lie. The truth is that I was not even in the house when it started. I was at my club, in town, where I spent most of my time, because Eleanor and we were not happy, Miss Gray. We had married for the usual reasons and discovered we did not suit, and I dealt with it the way faithless, comfortable men deal with such things, by being absent, by being cold, by leaving her alone in this great house with our child and my indifference. And the house caught fire in the night, and I was not there. And by the time I was fetched from town and rode back, she was already. They had gotten Grace out. A nursemaid had gotten Grace out, but Eleanor was still inside, and I went in after her." His jaw worked. Too late. She was already gone. "I know that now. The surgeon told me she could not have lived, but I did not know it then, and I went in, and the ceiling came down, and that is how I got this." He gestured at his ruined face. "Not rescuing my wife, Miss Gray, but 3 minutes too late to rescue a woman I had spent 5 years neglecting. So you see, the scar the county pities me for is not a wound of heroism. It is a brand. It is the exact and permanent mark of a man who was absent when it mattered, who was cold to a lonely woman until she died lonely, and who ran into the fire only after there was no one left to save. To save himself, I have sometimes thought, more than her, because I could not live with what I had failed to do, and some part of me hoped the fire would settle the account. It did not. It only marked me, so that I would have to carry the failure on my face for the rest of my life, where everyone could see it, and no one could read it. That is what I am, Miss Gray. Not a monster. Worse, a man who learned too late what he had, and was punished by being left alive and hideous to remember it. Now you know. Now, surely, you will go." Honoria Gray was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said, "but I will tell you what I think, since you have been honest, and you deserve honesty in return, and not comfort. I think you have spent 3 years punishing yourself for being human. You did not love a woman you should have loved, and you were cold when you should have been warm, and she died before you could mend it. And that is a real grief and a real fault, and I will not insult you by pretending it is not. You were absent. You were cold. Those things are true. But your Grace, you ran into a burning house. When you thought there was the smallest chance she lived, you went into the fire without a thought for yourself, and it cost you half your face, and you would do it again this instant. I have no doubt at all. That is also true, and you have decided not to count it, because you have decided you are only your failures, and never your love. But a man is both. You failed her in life, and you would have died for her at the end, and both of those are you. And the fire did not brand you a monster. It branded you a man who loved badly, and late, and was willing, when it came to it, to burn. There is no shame in that, so great as the shame you have wrapped yourself in. You have taken a heart that failed once, and decided it is only fit to be locked in the dark. And meanwhile there is a little girl upstairs who lost her mother in that same fire, and has spent 3 years losing her father to his guilt as well, grieving a man who is still alive, because you have decided you are too ruined to be loved, and have therefore refused to let her love you. That, your Grace, Not the scar, not even the neglect of your poor wife. That is the thing I think you should be ashamed of. Grace does not need you to have been a perfect husband. She needs you to stop hiding from her in the dark. She forgave you the moment you sang the song. Children do. It is the one thing they are better at than we are. The only person at Ravenshallow who has not forgiven you, Your Grace, is you. And your unforgiveness is costing that child her father. 3 years after the fire already cost her a mother. I think you can afford to stop. I think you cannot afford not to. The Duke of Ravenshallow sat in the firelight with the truth laid open in front of him, and Honoria watched him receive it. Not the comfort he had braced against, but the harder and kinder thing, which was to be seen exactly as he was, failure and love together, and told that the sum of him was still a man worth being, still a father worth having. No one, he said at last, very low, has ever said that to me. They either look away and pity me, or they flee. No one has ever sat in this room and told me the plain truth, and then not left. Why are you still here, Miss Grey? Truly, every other soul in my life has run. What is the matter with you, that you stay? Nothing is the matter with me, said Honoria Grey. I am simply not frightened of grief, or of scars, or of hard truths, or of you. I have found in 7 years of other people's houses that almost everything the world flees from is only a frightened person in armor, and that almost all of it can be reached, if one is only willing to stay in the room. I am very good at staying in rooms, Your Grace. It is, as I told your daughter, my best quality. And I find, she stopped, and a faint color came into her plain, calm face, and for the first time, she was the one who looked away. I find I have grown to, that is, this house, and Grace, and even you, difficult as you are. I find I do not wish to be anywhere else, which is more than a governess ought to say to her employer, and I have said it, and I shall blame the lateness of the hour. Good night, Your Grace. And she rose, flustered for the first time since she had come, and left him by the fire. And the Duke of Ravenshallow sat long into the night with his ruined face and his opened heart, and understood, with a slow astonishment that frightened him more than any fire, that he had fallen in love with the governess who was not afraid of him, and that he had not the smallest idea what to do about it, being a man who had failed the last woman who loved him, and was certain, in his bones, that he had no business being permitted to try again. There was a morning, not long after, that Honoria always counted as the true turning, the morning she got him out of the house. It began small, as her victories always did. Grace had been given a pony, a gentle old thing, and had been longing to show her father how well she could ride it, and had not dared to ask, because her father did not go out of doors, had not, in 3 years, set foot beyond his own walls by daylight, where he might be seen. So Honoria asked for her. She simply appeared in the library one bright morning and said, Grace is going to ride her pony in the south paddock at 11, Your Grace, and she would like you to watch, and I have come to tell you that you are going to, because it will cost you 1/4 of an hour and a small quantity of courage, and it will mean more to that child than anything you could give her, and I will be standing beside you the whole time, and no one else will be there. 11 o'clock, the south paddock. I will come and fetch you. People will see me, the Duke said. The grooms, the grooms have seen you for 3 years and are entirely used to you, Honoria said. It is only strangers who gasp, and there will be no strangers. And even if there were, you have decided the whole world must be spared the sight of your face, and the whole world has never once asked to be spared it. That is a decision you made alone, in the dark, out of pain, and you may unmake it the same way, in the light, out of love for your daughter. 11 o'clock, I shall not take no. You know by now that I never do. And at 11 o'clock she came and fetched him, and the Duke of Ravenshallow walked out of his own front door into the daylight for the first time in 3 years, his ruined face bare in the honest sun, his jaw set like a man walking to the scaffold, and Honoria walked beside him, steady and unhurried, close enough that her shoulder nearly touched his arm, and said quietly, There. The sky did not fall. Keep walking, I am here. And they came to the paddock, and Lady Grace, seeing her father out of doors, out of the dark, come into the sunlight to watch her. Lady Grace's whole small face broke open with a joy so complete that the Duke made a low sound, as though it hurt him, the particular hurt of a heart that has been frozen too long, feeling the blood come painfully back into it. The child rode her pony round the paddock, sitting very straight, glowing, calling, "Papa, are you watching? Papa, look!" And the Duke of Ravenshallow stood at the rail in the sunlight and watched his daughter and called back, roughly, "I am watching, Grace. I see you. You ride beautifully. I am watching." And Honoria Gray stood beside him and watched them both, and thought that there was no cathedral in England holier than a paddock rail on a bright morning, where a broken man had come out of the dark for the love of his child. "You did this," the Duke said to her, low, not taking his eyes from his daughter. "I would have died in that house, Honoria, in the dark, punishing myself until there was nothing left, and Grace would have grown up in the shadow of it, learning that love is a thing that fails and leaves and hides its face. And you walked in with one small trunk and you refused to let it happen. You refused to leave the room. Why? You still have not truly told me why. What is a governess doing, risking her whole position, to drag a scarred recluse into the sunlight? You could have taught the child her letters and kept your head down and been safe. Why did you fight for me? For us?" Honoria was quiet a moment, watching Grace ride. "Because I know what it is to be left," she said at last, simply. "I told you I was good at staying in rooms. I did not tell you why. It is because no one ever stayed in the room with me. When my family's money went, they went too. Scattered, ashamed, each too busy surviving to think of the plain daughter who had to go for a governess. I was 19, and frightened, and alone, and I learned in one hard year that the world does not stay. And I decided, it was the only thing I had the power to decide, that I would be, for other people, the thing no one had been for me, that I would stay, in the rooms everyone else fled, with the children no one wanted, and the difficult employers no one could manage, and, once, with a man the whole county had run from. Because I know exactly what it does to a person to be fled from, Your Grace, and I know exactly what it would have meant to me, at 19, if one single soul had refused to leave. So I stay. It is the whole of my character, and the whole of my worth, and it is the only wealth I have ever had to give. And I gave it to you and to Grace, because you needed it more than anyone I have ever met, and because—" She stopped, and the color came into her plain face again. "And because somewhere in the staying, I stopped doing it out of principle, and started doing it because I could not imagine leaving you, which is a different thing, and a more frightening one. And I have said far too much, and Grace is about to attempt a trot she is not ready for, so I shall go and prevent it." And she went quickly to the child. But the Duke of Ravenshallow watched her go with an expression on his ruined face that had not been there in 3 years, and understood that the woman who was not afraid of his wound had a wound of her own exactly like it, the wound of being left, and had spent her whole life healing in others the hurt no one had healed in her. And he thought that he would spend the rest of his life, if she would let him, being the one person who finally stayed in the room with her. He tried to send her away. Of course he did. It is what the wounded do when they begin to feel too much. They reach for the door and push the loved thing through it, because being left is unbearable, but being left after you have truly hoped is a death. And a man who has decided he does not deserve to be loved will burn down his own happiness sooner than risk it being taken. He did it clumsily, a week after the night by the fire. He summoned Honoria to the library and informed her, in a cold, flat voice that did not match his eyes at all, that he had reconsidered her position, that Lady Grace was doing well enough now, that a change would be beneficial, that he would write her an excellent character and a generous settlement, and that she should make arrangements to leave Ravenshallow by the end of the month. He said it staring at the wall. He said it like a man reading a sentence he had written himself and hated. Honoria heard him out, and then, instead of accepting it, she did the thing she always did, which was to decline to be driven off. "No," she said. The Duke's head came round. "I beg your pardon?" "No, Your Grace. I will not make arrangements to leave, because you do not want me to leave, and we both know it, and I am too tired this evening to pretend otherwise for the sake of your fear. You are dismissing me because the other night I saw you. truly saw you, the failure and the love together, and you told me things you have never told anyone. And afterward I said a foolish thing about not wishing to be anywhere else, and it frightened you, because you felt something answer it in yourself. And a man who has decided he is too ruined to be loved cannot allow himself to feel that. So you are pushing me out the door before I can matter to you any more than I already do. I understand it completely. I have watched you do the same thing to the whole world for 3 years. But I am not going to help you do it to me, Your Grace, because it would be a lie, and I have grown fond of the truth in this library, and fonder still of the man who tells it to me when he is not busy being a coward about it. She stepped closer. You do not want me gone. Say that you do. Say it looking at me, not at the wall. Say, Honoria, I feel nothing for you, and I wish you gone from my house. Say it to my face and mean it, and I will pack my trunk tonight and never trouble you again. Go on. It is a simple thing. Look at me and lie. The Duke of Ravenshallow looked at her, and he opened his mouth to say it. She watched him try, and he could not. The words would not come, because they were not true, and whatever else the fire had left him, it had not left him able to lie to the one person who had looked at his ruin without flinching. I cannot, he said, and his rough voice broke on it. God help me, Honoria, I cannot say it, but you must go anyway. Do you not understand? It is precisely because I cannot say it that you must go. I loved a woman once, and I failed her until she died. That is what I do. I am absent. I am cold. I am too late. I have proof of it, burned into my face. And now there is a good woman standing in my library whom I have come to, whom I cannot even say I do not. And every instinct I have screams that I will fail you too, that I will be cold when I should be warm, that I will leave you as alone as I left her, and that you will end as she ended, and I will have another grave, and another brand, and no face at all left to hide behind. I am trying to save you, Honoria, from me. It is the only unselfish thing I know how to do. Let me do it. Go, and be loved by someone whole, someone who has not already proven what he is, someone who will not fail you the way I am certain. I am certain I will fail you. And Honoria Gray, plain, calm, stubborn Honoria Gray, who had stayed in 100 rooms she was meant to flee, crossed the last of the distance between them, and did a thing no governess ought ever to do, and took the ruined face of the Duke of Ravenshallow gently between her 2 hands, the scarred side and the whole, and held it, and made him look at her. Now you listen to me, she said, because I am going to tell you the truth one more time, and it is the most important one. You are not the man who failed your wife. You were that man, 3 years ago, and then that man's house burned down, and his face burned with it, and he spent 3 years in the dark learning, the hardest way a soul can learn anything, exactly what his coldness cost. And a man who learns that lesson so completely, who carries it burned into his very face and lets it reshape the whole of him, is not the same man who needed to learn it. You keep saying you will fail me, the way you failed her, but the man who failed her never once ran into a fire. The man who failed her never sat in the dark for 3 years, unable to forgive himself, because he had understood at last what love is worth. The man standing in front of me is not the absent, cold husband of 5 years ago. Your Grace, he is the man that husband became after the fire taught him everything. And that man, the one holding still while a governess holds his ruined face, is the least likely man in all of England to be cold to someone he loves, because he knows, now, precisely and unbearably, what coldness costs. You are not doomed to fail me. You are the one man alive who has been burned past all forgetting into knowing better. Do you not see? Your scar is not the proof that you will fail me. It is the proof that you never will. It is the mark of everything you learned. I am not frightened of the man who learned it. I am in love with him. I have been in love with him for weeks, and I am not going anywhere, and you cannot make me, because the one thing I am better at than anyone in England is staying in the room with a frightened person until they understand they are safe. Stay in the room with me, Alaric. That is all I am asking. Stop trying to save me by leaving me. Just stay. The Duke of Ravenshallow stood with his ruined face in the hands of the woman who was not afraid of it, and 3 years of grief and guilt and self-punishment came apart in him all at once, and he wept, the great racking silent weeping of a man who has held himself rigid for far too long. And Honoria held him, his scarred face against her plain, steady shoulder, and did not flinch, and did not leave, and did the one thing she had come to Ravenshallow to do, which was to stay in the room until the frightened creature understood, at last, that it was safe to be loved. "I do not know how," he said, into her shoulder. "To be loved, to let it in. I have forgotten. I am not certain I ever knew." "I know," said Honoria Gray. "That is all right. I am extremely patient, and I am not going anywhere, and we have a great deal of time. You will learn it the way you learned everything else that matters, slowly, and badly at first, and then all at once. And there is a little girl upstairs who will be very glad to help teach you, because she has never stopped wanting to. Not for one day of these 3 years. We shall learn it together, the 3 of us. You need only do the one thing, stay in the room. Can you do that?" "With you," said the Duke of Ravenshallow, lifting his ruined, tear-streaked, unhidden face to look at her. "I find I can do a very great deal that I could not do alone. Stay, Honoria, not as Grace's governess. Stay as... I have no right to ask it. I who am marked and ruined and have failed once already. But I am asking, because you told me to stop trying to save you by leaving, and so I will ask instead of flee, which is the bravest thing I have done since the fire. Marry me. Stay in the room for the rest of our lives. Let me learn to be warm from the one woman who was never frightened of the cold. I love you. I have not said those words in 6 years, and I was certain I would never say them again, and mean them. And I mean them now with the whole of whatever I am. Marry me, Honoria Gray." And Honoria, who had arrived in the rain with one small trunk and no expectations, and had won a monster's household by the simple refusal to flee, smiled her plain, calm, steady smile, the one that had unnerved 5 employers and undone 1 duke, and did not let go of his face. "Yes," she said, "of course I will. I told Grace on the first day that I was staying, Your Grace, and I am a woman of my word. Did you imagine I meant a fortnight?" They were married quietly, at Ravenshallow in the spring, and the Duke of Ravenshallow, who had not shown his scarred face in the county for 3 years, walked out of his own great house into the daylight to be married, in front of God and the servants, and a small astonished gathering of neighbors, with his ruined face bare and unhidden, and turned toward the sun. It was, the county said afterward, the most remarkable thing. Not that the feared scarred duke had married his daughter's governess, but that he had come out of the dark at all. That the plain, steady woman had somehow reached into the black house where a monster was said to live, and let out, blinking into the light, only a grieving man who had learned to hope again. Lady Grace was the whole of the wedding party, and held the ring, and did not stop smiling for a week. And the marriage healed all 3 of them, in the slow, patient way that real healing goes. Honoria had told him he would learn to be warm slowly and badly at first, and then all at once. And she was right, as she was right about most things. There were hard days. A man does not unmake 3 years of guilt in a season. And there were nights when the old conviction rose in him that he did not deserve his own happiness, that he would surely fail them, that the fire had marked him for solitude. And on those nights, his wife would take his ruined face in her 2 steady hands, exactly as she had the first time, and hold it, and say, "Stay in the room, Alaric. That is all. Just stay." And he would stay, and the darkness would pass, because it always passed now, because he was no longer alone in it. He became, in time, a different man than the county had feared, and a better one than the county had known before the fire. A present father, a warm husband, a landlord who came out among his people with his scarred face bare, and dared them, gently, to look, until the whole county grew so used to the sight of the Duke of Ravenshallow going about his business that they forgot to be frightened, and remembered instead that he was kind. The scar never faded. He stopped wishing it would. "It is the map of everything I learned," he told Honoria once, years on, watching Grace and her small half-brothers play in the garden he had once shut himself away from. "I used to think it was a brand of shame. You taught me to read it differently. It is only the mark of the night I learned what love was worth. A little too late for Eleanor, God rest her, and just in time for you. I would not have it gone. It is the truest thing about me, and it led you to look at me. And no whole-faced happy man was ever loved more completely than I have been, by the woman who was not afraid of the burn. And Honoria, Duchess of Ravenshallow now, still plain, still calm, still entirely unfrightened by anything the world could show her, would take his scarred face in her hands, as she always did, and turn it to the light, and love it, and stay in the room, exactly as she had promised a frightened child and a ruined man on a rainy day, when she arrived with one small trunk and the only wealth she had ever needed, which was the stubborn, unglamorous, world-changing refusal to be driven away from someone who needed her to stay. Everyone feared the scarred Duke, she told their children, when they were old enough to ask how she and Papa had met. The whole county. They warned me on the road that I would not last a fortnight. She would smile then, the plain, steady smile, and reach for her husband's hand. But I have never been afraid of a wound in my life, my darlings. A wound is only the place where someone was hurt. And the thing about the places where people are hurt is that they are not to be fled from. They are to be stayed beside and kept warm and loved until they heal. Your father was the most wounded man in England, and everyone ran from him. I stayed. That is the whole story. I simply stayed. It is the most powerful thing one person can do for another, and it costs nothing but courage. And it is the reason you are all here. Remember it. When you find someone the world has decided to fear or flee, stay. You will not believe, until you have done it, what a wounded person will become, if only one soul refuses to leave the room.